Hey, Dave here from XLJet. So today we're talking about Excel shortcuts. This is one of my favorite topics. And I wonder if this has ever happened to you. Have you ever looked over somebody's shoulder or watched a video and seen somebody use an Excel shortcut that was really useful and thought, wow, that's really cool. I could use that in my own work. And then a week later or a month later, you're in Excel and you realize suddenly, like, I could use that shortcut. And you try this, but it doesn't work. Then you try that, it doesn't work. And then you Google for a minute to see if you can figure out quickly what it is, but you get way more information than you really wanted. And 5 minutes go by, and suddenly you feel like, I don't have time for this, I have to do my work. And you feel kind of frustrated, and you still don't know the shortcut. So if this has ever happened to you, don't worry, it happens to everybody who uses Excel. And the reason is that Excel shortcuts are just plain complicated. And I learned this myself back in 2013. I was making some training videos and I needed a good reference for both Windows shortcuts and Mac shortcuts. And I looked around, but I couldn't really find anything that was complete. And so I decided that I would just build my own. And at this point, I had been using Excel for more than 20 years. I had always been a power user and always used both Mac and Windows, so I knew a lot of shortcuts on both platforms. And I figured, how hard could it be? Well, as I got into the project, I was shocked with how complicated the topic really is. It didn't take me that long to put together most of the shortcuts. I had most of them together in a couple of months, but that was 2013. And since that time, I have added shortcuts and adjusted shortcuts and basically spent a lot of time tracking down good shortcut information. And this is over a period of 3 years. So it begs the question, why are Excel shortcuts so complicated? And after working with this now for a few years, I have some reasons that I want to share with you. Number one, there's a huge number of Excel shortcuts. So there's over 200 shortcuts for the Mac and 200 shortcuts for Windows. And so if you're lucky enough to use both platforms, that's over 400 shortcuts that you need to keep track of. Number two, the shortcuts are often kind of difficult. They're not very intuitive to learn. And this comes from the fact that they were organized originally around the function keys. And so they have names like F2, F3, F4, F10, and so on. And it's just not that intuitive, and you have to kind of just memorize them. And you'll also find that the names themselves can be ambiguous. One person might say fill down, but another person might say Control D. And they both mean the same shortcut, they just refer to it in a different way. You'll also run into names for shortcuts like select precedence or select dependence or go to special, where the value of the shortcut just really isn't that clear. Now, if you use Excel on both platforms, both Windows and Mac, you'll find that the shortcuts are somewhat inconsistent. Macs typically have a different keyboard that doesn't have a home key, doesn't have a end key, doesn't have backspace or page up or page down. And in those cases, for shortcuts that use those keys, there'll be variations. And then in other cases, you'll just find that a certain shortcut is just completely different. So a fourth reason that Excel shortcuts are somewhat complicated is that you'll find that some commands have more than one shortcut. So for example, you can use F5 to open up the Go To dialog, but you can also use Control G. And you can use F4 to repeat an action, but you can also use Control Y. And then sometimes the context will actually change the meaning of the shortcut. So F4 means to repeat an action when you're not editing a formula. But if you are editing a formula, then F4 will toggle between relative and absolute references. And the fifth reason that I think that Excel shortcuts are complicated is because of the ribbon. So on Windows, you have a ribbon that has what are called accelerator keys. And this lets you drive the ribbon from your keyboard. And this is a really useful feature because in cases where you don't have a dedicated shortcut, you can use your keyboard only to issue pretty much any command in Excel. But on the other hand, the ribbon adds a huge stack of shortcuts on top of an already huge pool of shortcuts. And so in the end, you have hundreds and hundreds of shortcuts that are potentially, or that can be potentially used in Excel. So at this point, you might be thinking, yeah, Dave, it does sound pretty complicated and pretty challenging, and I'm just an average Excel user, so I probably don't really need to worry about shortcuts, right? Well, I honestly believe that there's nothing else you can do that will save you more time and aggravation in Excel in the long run than learning shortcuts. They are that powerful. And I've got 6 reasons that I want to share with you. Number 1, Excel shortcuts allow you to work faster and more accurately in Excel. So not only can Excel do something faster than you when you use a shortcut, but it can do it perfectly every time. And this really matters if you have a lot of repetitive work to do. Which brings me to reason 2. Excel shortcuts can really save your sanity if you have a lot of tedious and repetitive work to do. So if you need to do the same thing in a row 100 times, and this comes up all the time in Excel, you'll be really glad that you know a shortcut for that action. Reason number 3, Excel shortcuts allow you to focus on your work and not on the interface. So it's no secret that over time, the Excel interface, especially with the introduction of the ribbon, has become more complicated and more dense. But when you know shortcuts, you can just use those shortcuts and almost completely ignore the interface, knowing with confidence that Excel will do the action that you just told it to. And reason number 4, big data. So these days, everybody is dealing with more and more data. And when you work with a lot of data, Excel shortcuts really make a huge difference because they let you navigate the data and select very precisely and accurately certain parts of the data without having to scroll. So not having to use your mouse when you're working with large amounts of data is a huge time saver. Reason 5, Excel shortcuts allow you to see into Excel in a different way than you would otherwise, and you can learn some really powerful features that you might not know about. You can think of shortcuts as a kind of X-ray view into Excel's most useful and powerful features. And as you gain more experience with shortcuts, you can use Excel more intelligently, and you can start to combine shortcuts into what I call shortcut recipes, which are basically a series of shortcuts that you put together to perform a particular and kind of complicated action in Excel. This is a really powerful idea, and I'm going to talk more about it in the next video and show you some examples of what I mean. And reason number 6, and perhaps the most important reason to learn Excel shortcuts, is they make Excel a lot more fun to use. So trust me on this, if you spend a lot of time in Excel, then it will be much more enjoyable if you learn a lot of shortcuts. Okay, so with all that said, with that introduction, I want to take you now on a quick tour of some really useful and popular Excel shortcuts. We recently did a survey and we heard back from more than 800 users. And one of the questions we asked is, what's your favorite shortcut? And we got back a lot of really great answers, but some shortcuts just kind of naturally bubble to the top again and again. So what I want to do next is walk you through this list of, say, 30 to 40 really popular shortcuts that I know are really useful because I use them all the time, and I know that also other people use them all the time as well. So let's go do that training. All right, so here we are in Excel, and now I'm going to walk you through some very popular and useful Excel shortcuts. First, since we have a lot of tabs in this workbook, you should know that you can move right through tabs with Control Page down and left with Control Page up. On a Mac, you can also use Option with the right and left arrow keys. Now, the most popular shortcuts by far in Excel are copy and paste. You can copy with Control C and paste with Control V. On a Mac, you can use either the Command key or the Control key for many of these shortcuts. Another very useful shortcut you'll see me use often in this video is Undo, Control Z. In addition to Control V to paste, you can also use Enter to paste. On a Mac, add the Function key. To cut instead of copy, use Ctrl X. Then paste normally. One of the most important shortcuts in Excel is Paste Special, which is Ctrl-Alt-V in Windows and Ctrl-Command-V on a Mac. Before we try it, let's first check the formulas on this worksheet using Ctrl+Grave. This shortcut toggles the worksheet to show all formulas and numbers without any formatting. Just use the same shortcut again to toggle off formulas. Most often, Paste Special is used to strip out formulas and formatting. To do that, use Paste Special with values. Once you're inside the dialog, you can type the underlined letters to select options. So in this case, V for values. The result is just values without formatting or formulas. There are lots of things you can do with Paste Special. You can keep number formatting, but get rid of formulas. You can keep formulas and number formats, but strip everything else. And you can also use Paste Special to copy only formatting, which is useful when you paste data below a table and you want to quickly extend the formatting. To do this, just select a row with the formatting you want, copy, and use Paste Special with formats. Paste Special has many other useful options, and we cover these in detail in our course on Excel shortcuts. Entering the current date and time is another task that you might need to do often in Excel, and there are shortcuts for both. For the current date, use Ctrl plus semicolon. For the current time, use Ctrl-Shift::. If you want both, just separate with a space, and Excel will recognize this as a valid date time. Although you can double-click a cell to edit, you can also edit a cell with your keyboard using F2 in Windows and Ctrl-U on a Mac. This allows you to make edits to cells without taking your hands off the keyboard. Next, let's look at some shortcuts for navigating a worksheet. First, no matter what cell is selected in a worksheet, you can go back to the first cell with Ctrl plus the Home key. To move to the last cell in a worksheet, use Ctrl plus the End key. Inside a table, you can use Ctrl plus an arrow key to travel through the data in any direction. In this way, I can move quickly to all four corners. To select data with these same shortcuts, just hold down the Shift key. This allows you to easily select rows, columns, and even an entire table. When you're in a table, you can also select everything with Ctrl-A. Once you've made a selection, remember that you can extend the edges of the selection by holding down the Shift key and using arrow keys. To select entire rows, use Shift plus the spacebar. To select entire columns, use Ctrl plus the spacebar. Again, you can use Shift to extend the selection as needed. Excel also has keyboard shortcuts for inserting and deleting rows and columns. By itself, Ctrl-Shift+ will bring up the Insert dialog with options to insert entire rows or columns. Ctrl- does the same thing with the Delete dialog. However, you can insert and delete much faster if you first select entire rows or columns. This lets you delete and insert without a dialog. Whenever you're working with data in a table, you can make these same shortcuts much more powerful by converting the data to an Excel table using the shortcut Ctrl-T. Now the same shortcuts for selecting rows and columns will only select data inside the table. As before, Control-A will select the entire table, but now it won't include the headers. The power of tables becomes clear when you have to work with a really large table, like this one here with 3,000 rows and 36 columns. After I convert the data to a proper Excel table, notice that the headers will automatically be visible even if I move down to the bottom of the table. On top of that, I can select full rows and columns easily, knowing that the data is always perfectly selected. No list of Excel shortcuts would be complete without Autosum, a handy shortcut for quickly summing numbers with the sum function. Autosum is Alt equals in Windows and Command-Shift-T on a Mac. You can use Autosum to sum both rows and columns. You can even Autosum an entire table in one step. One of the things that you do most often in Excel is enter data, and I've got two shortcuts to show you that can really help you with this. The first is Fill Down, or Control-D. Fill Down is an excellent shortcut for quickly getting data from cells above without using copy and paste. You can use Fill Down on one cell at a time, or with multiple cells. You can even use Fill Down on multiple columns at the same time. Fill Down is a really handy shortcut, but you can speed things up even more if you enter data in multiple cells at the start. To do this, just make a selection, type some data, and use Control-Enter instead of just Enter. Control-Enter works fine for formulas as well. The relative cell references will update normally. So speaking of formulas, let's look at a shortcut for toggling absolute and relative references. In this worksheet, I want to summarize sales by color, so I can use the SUMIF function. To do that, I'll need to enter a range and criteria, and then a sum range. But notice that if I don't lock down certain references, the ranges will shift as the formulas are copied down. So to prevent this, I need to lock the ranges by making them absolute. The shortcut for this is F4 on Windows, Command-T on a Mac, and this will toggle through the absolute and relative options. Now when I copy the formula down, the range references are fixed properly. Excel also has dedicated shortcuts for hiding and showing rows and columns. So you can hide columns with Control-0, and you can hide rows with Control-9. To unhide rows and columns again, just select data that includes the hidden rows or columns and use the same shortcuts with the Shift key held down. When you have rows or columns hidden and you want to copy and paste only the visible cells, notice that you'll end up with everything by default if you just do a normal copy-paste. To fix this, you need to select the visible cells only first. And to do that, use the shortcut Alt-semicolon in Windows and Command-Shift-Z on a Mac. Then copy and paste normally. We already looked at the shortcut to create a new table, Control-T, but we didn't talk about filters. New tables automatically get filters, and to toggle these filters on and off, you can use the shortcut Control-Shift-L in Windows or Command-Shift-F on a Mac. When one or more filters are actively filtering data, this same shortcut is an excellent way to reset a table. Just use the shortcut twice in a row. Okay, next, two shortcuts useful for formatting. The first is Format Cells, or you can think of it as Format Anything. Just use Control-1 in Windows or Command-1 on a Mac. You can use this shortcut to access formatting for almost anything, the beauty of the shortcut is that you can access this formatting from anywhere without worrying about the ribbon. And it works great for objects and charts as well, so not just for cells. The next shortcut is Repeat in Action. To do this, use F4 or Control-Y on Windows and Command-Y on a Mac. Not all actions can be repeated, but you can add the repeat command to the Quick Access toolbar to help you understand when you can repeat an action, as I've done in this case. So, for example, the last thing I did was apply a border, so I can use repeat to apply the same border to the second table. You can also use repeat for actions like inserting or deleting rows or columns or inserting sheets. Okay, finally, let's wrap things up with a shortcut that puzzles many people. The shortcut to add a new line inside a cell. On Windows, use Alt-Enter, and on a Mac, use Control-Option-Return. If you have any trouble, make sure that wrap text is enabled. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that training and you learned at least a couple of new shortcuts that you can use to save a little bit of time, a little bit of effort in Excel. I'll be back in another video to talk more about this concept of shortcut recipes and give you some examples of really powerful and interesting ways to save time with shortcuts. And in the meantime, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below this video, and I will talk to you again soon.